Hey, Michael, it is January 18th.
So I am stuck in an airport today, and that means I'm bored. So I'm going to make a little bit longer video this time and talk about something you talked a little bit about, riff off of what you did. Really enjoyed your last video, all about the scientific side of Pink Floyd and Dark Side of the Moon, their Prism logo, how that all works. I thought it was great. So I see your science-related topic, and I'm going to raise you one with Elton John and Rocket Man. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the term musicology, because you almost did some musicology in your last video, whether you knew it or not.
Yeah, it's interesting how science, the world, they can all have an influence on culture and music and art. Not just superficial things like the title of albums, but you kind of started talking about changes in what it means to be human. Um, I'd say you got pretty close to something that we do in academic music, and that's, we call it musicology, which is just what it sounds like, the study of music. Talk about music and how it's constructed, and then also its context and what it's meant to mean, if it's meant to mean anything or anything in particular. And so I thought, you kind of opened a Pandora's box. I'm going to do a long one this time about that. So in musicology, like any academic subject that isn't science, you're not going to have definitive, objective proof. You have to just construct arguments, and we do something called a chain of significance. And a chain of significance is pretty much what it sounds like. You chain together different pieces of evidence, things that are significant to the piece of music or its context, and you make some kind of theory out of that about what it means or what the composer was trying to say, or some piece or element of the music that you can learn other than just listening to it out of context. So a good example of that is like Beethoven's Third Symphony, Eroica. He wrote that while Napoleon was conquering all of Europe and touting all these democratic ideals. And Beethoven liked the sound of that, and so he modeled the whole Third Symphony on the idea of democracy triumphing. And we know that because the dedication was originally to Napoleon, and then when Napoleon crowned himself emperor and threw away the idea of democracy, Beethoven tried to cross out Napoleon's name so vigorously that he ripped through the title page. There's a tear in the autograph score of Eroica. So it gives you a pretty clear picture for what he was going for and how he felt about it. And that's just a small example. You do have to be careful with that, though, because you need the whole context. If you don't understand everything, you might make a mistake. Like, for instance, Mozart wrote both Magic Flute and his Requiem Mass at the end of his life, literally and figuratively. His wife had moved out, and he was dying. And so at the same time, you've got this really sweet, cute opera and this really terrible, really sad Requiem side by side. So not every composer necessarily wrote how they were feeling. The idea of like the inspired artist it's too much has been made of that. All this process of coming up with ideas about music and supporting them with different arguments chained together, chains of significance, musicology. I do that a lot on my other channel, Scorekeeping, and whether it's talking about hero sounds, like what are the sounds that we have agreed sound heroic? Like, why does the music for the Avengers sound so heroic? Or for Star Wars or Batman or any of that, or something else. You can talk about what we do in music and how it's represented and break that down.
So take, for instance, Rocket Man by Elton John, another kind of sci-fi piece. You've got G minor 7 and C9, and that's rocking between the 1 chord in that scale and the 4 chord in that scale, and they're both modified, so it's a very comfortable, homey sort of thing. Now we ramp up here in the interlude with an E flat chord, B over D, which is really just a B7, and a C minor 7 chord, which are all minor parts of that scale. When we get to the F chord here, and that is the 5 chord of the key the chorus will be in when we switch to major, a lighter, happier mode. Now the 5 chord always wants to resolve to the 1 chord, which for this song, the major chorus is in B flat major. And it goes between B flat and E flat again. And more of that homey, comfortable 4/5 plagal motion until we get to the text, Rocket Man. Now, all of a sudden, we've got ourselves a C major 7 chord. And what's important about that is that it's not a chord in the key of B flat major. So where did it come from? You could try to make it a major 2, 7, but that would still be a borrowed chord. This kind of chord is most typically called a 5 of 5 chord because it leads us
to the key of 5. So we're modulating here, and it's kind of cool because this is a move when you go out of the key that you're in to underline something, to say something special. This really got started in the Romantic era. And when he says Rocket Man, he's underlining the fact that he's different than people think he is at home. He even says that. I'm not going to put the lyrics up, but that's the point he's making. And the music goes with it to match. The music is suddenly different. And I think you could make a lot of arguments based on this. Just off the top of my head, and I will tell you I haven't done a whole lot of research, Rocket Man sounds like maybe a euphemism for something that we all know about Elton John. And beyond that, the chorus is in major, and the modal shift there from the original key to the key of 5 is very... it not only changes from minor to major, but you're shifting modes on the scale of keys on the keyboard. So, it's not definitive, but you could say that he's celebrating the difference. And in a time where you have to speak in code, maybe that's the only way you can celebrate being gay, say. So there you go. There's a musicological argument about Rocket Man, mostly off the top of my head, so don't don't try to break it too hard, because you probably can. But at least it shows you what it's like to make a musicological argument. Anyway, that's my video for this time. Went over to draw some chains of significance. If you ever want to do something like that together, that would be very cool. Or maybe we could do an interdisciplinary thing where you talk about the physics of sound and I talk about how opera singers manipulate that. Anyway, it'd be fun to do one of these projects together and with a little time and real effort.
So that's what I got for you this week, buddy. Mostly just me BSing in an airport, but hopefully you learned something. See you tomorrow.